What's going on, football fans? Grump is back. The NFL season's around the corner. Training camp even closer than that. College football even closer than that. So expect more and more of my stuff throughout the college season, getting ready for the 2024 draft. So be sure to like and subscribe. Tell people on Twitter if it's still a thing, at @football_grump. Like and subscribe on YouTube goes a long way. Thank you very much for watching. Let's get to it. First question is probably, why are you doing anything about the USFL? That's a fairly decent question, I think. But I would view it like this. The USFL and the XFL, to me, looks a lot like college football for super seniors. So in that regard, I kind of view all of these players as potential undrafted free agents, which is actually exactly what they are. So for everybody who likes rounds 6 and 7 of the draft, day 3 of the draft, all the undrafted free agents, finding out everything you can about them, this is literally that. And that's what I like, so that's why I do it. If you think that this is a stupid waste of time, just look at it this way. I watched the USFL, so you didn't have to. In any case, why am I actually doing this? Because in 2022, the USFL MVP was Kavontae Turpin from the New Jersey Generals. He had 44 catches in the regular season for 540 yards, 4 touchdowns, 23 rushes for 129 yards and 1 touchdown, and most importantly, 12 punt returns for 184 yards and a touchdown. The Dallas Cowboys took a shot on him, and in a preseason game, he returned both a kick and a punt for a touchdown, earning himself a roster spot. In the regular season last year, Kavontae Turpin had 508 kick yards and 303 punt return yards. So now the Cowboys have themselves a gadget offensive player and a special teams ace for 3 years on a low cap hit. The USFL and XFL offer players that are worth a chance for development at minimal investment, not totally unlike UDFAs. So with that said, while I was doing this and getting prepared to make this video, 2 players already signed with the NFL. The first was the Cowboys again signing Birmingham Stallions kicker, the 2-time USFL champions now, Brandon Aubrey. Brandon Aubrey doesn't have a background in football and likely would not have gotten a shot in the NFL. He's a former Major League Soccer player for both Toronto and Bethlehem, but this year went 14 of 15 for field goals with a 49-yard long and 100% point after attempts. Worth a shot, in my opinion. The other player was actually somebody I was going to do work on, and thankfully he got signed before I went through the trouble of making clip cut-ups for him, so I didn't do it. But his name is Josh Peterson of the Jacksonville Jaguars, now formerly Houston Gamblers. You might notice the name connection, so this is kind of an iffy one, but it's Doug Peterson's son. That being said, the 26-year-old out of Louisiana Monroe does sort of look the part. Like I said, he did make this list before I knew he was going to sign. I also didn't know he was Doug Peterson's son until he signed. But he's 6'5", 235. Measurables are only about 10 pounds lighter than I'd like him. But he's more of a receiving tight end than anything. Don't mistake that for lining up outside. He does line up kind of all over. But one of the things that jumped out to me was how quickly he gets out of his inline stance. It's not something that you see a whole lot at the NCAA level, is somebody lining up as a Y tight end and shooting out of their stance, but he does it a lot and pretty well. It jumped right out at me. Houston didn't have the best quarterback situation for him, so he went 24 of 37 for 325 yards receiving. That's not bad for a 10-game season. I do think that he has the frame to add the weight necessary to become more of a factor in the blocking game. He's already comfortable lining up and shooting out of his stance in a Y spot, so I do think that he can develop in this regard. As far as being a receiving tight end, I think he has some pretty nice hands. Like I said, he's quick out of his stance. He has good speed to stretch the field, and I think he demands a DB in coverage. For a tight end, if that's all you're doing and freeing up wide receivers like we might be able to do in Jacksonville, that's something worth a cheap contract. Will he do anything? This one I'm a little iffy on. He would have been my lowest. At the end of the day, I could see him sticking around the Jaguars mainly because of his dad for long enough time to start developing and earn some kind of meaningful-ish snaps with a sink or swim kind of chance. Now, before I go totally into this, I do want to list some guys that aren't going to be on this list. So I am avoiding specific kinds of players from the USFL for this. For instance, guys who already had their big shot in the NFL and kind of flamed out, they could make the jump to go back, but it's not going to surprise anybody, and it's not really altogether different than them kind of retiring for a year and coming back. But I'm talking about former first-round pick guys like Corey Coleman, who is now with the Philadelphia Stars, and Reuben Foster, another former first-round pick who is with the Pittsburgh Maulers. I'm also picking based on NFL likelihood. So positional value, it's going to be heavily considered here. So players with positions rather with steep learning curves, you're not going to be getting a whole lot of quarterbacks coming out of here. I'm also trying to pick guys that are going to have an impact in the NFL. Sure, there's quarterbacks that might be a third string backwards hat guy for their entire time in the NFL, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about guys who can go in there and make something happen on a given play. Someone who is going to be the 53rd man on the roster that's worth it. So all of the guys that I'm talking about here have either some form of versatility, some special teams value, or they have some crazy big play ability that makes them worth taking a shot on. So these are by no means a list of the 4 best USFL players like league MVP Alex Magoo, the quarterback for the Birmingham Stallions, who is legitimately fun to watch, and his ability to throw off-balance throws and off-script plays and still make something happen is legitimately fun to watch. Nor are these the most productive players in the league, like the sack leader Breeland Speaks. These are just guys that I think are going to come in and earn a spot on the team. The first guy we're going to talk about is a guy who's kind of iffy on putting on here at all, but it's wide receiver Davion Davis from the Birmingham Stallions, 26 years old, 5'11", 195 pounds, out of Sam Houston State, went undrafted. He briefly bounced around with the Vikings. He was waived after violating substance abuse policy, and that was sort of his time in the NFL. This year, he went 39 of 58 for 575 yards, 4 touchdowns. He also returned 13 punts for 120 yards. He doesn't have the big-time speed that a wide receiver you'd expect me to pick out of the USFL. I think he ran something like a 4.6 40. But that being said, I do think that he has 2 different kinds of speeds. He has his testing speed, and then he has the moment speed, which is something that we kind of saw out of Odell Beckham Jr., where when the ball's in his hands, he kind of just moves at a different speed. I would also say that the things that I think separate him from most other wide receivers that are coming out of college or whatever, excellent hands. And I also think that he does something special after the catch. He seems to have a knack for breaking tackles in unorthodox ways. He doesn't have the same set of jukes and moves to get free either. I mean, it just sort of seems to come natural to him. Not talking about Kadarius Toney here, but every little slant, if there's only one guy that's going to tackle him, one guy in the vicinity, you can at least hold your breath knowing that there's a chance he's going to break that tackle more so than most other wide receivers. I think that while he doesn't have the big-time speed, he has enough speed to separate. I don't think that he's too much of a dancer either, where he gets himself in trouble. He just tends to make people miss or bounce off of him. I think he's really good at operating off script and helping his quarterback, something that Alex Magoo and the Birmingham Stallions kind of did a lot of. But he certainly helps out his quarterback, works his way back to the ball and things like that. Route running, I think, is probably the biggest thing that's a question mark. It's only mildly developed, I think, is a fair way to say it. He doesn't do a whole lot at the top of the route, but he does have some speed to separate. He doesn't do much of the line of scrimmage. He's clearly better out of the slot, and he's not even really the quickest, but he does have a really good ability to stick his foot in the ground and change directions and sell it really, really well. I think that he's a low-risk camp invite that could be a realistic 2 to 3 year window depth player, not unlike Richie James. I think he's going to need further development in his route running, but we're not starting from scratch here. With the speed that he has in the open field, with the excellent hands and the ability after the catch, I think he's worth attempting to develop if he can separate himself in camp. He also went from the XFL in the spring to the USFL in the summer, and he to go to a training camp in the fall might be asking a lot to him. So this might be a name to put a pin in for next year, but he's certainly somebody that jumped off of the tape to me that I thought was worth discussing, that might get a camp invite, and from there we'll see what happens with him. Davion Davis, I hope we see you in the NFL soon. Next up on the list is Pittsburgh Maulers wide receiver Isaiah Henne. 5'7", 171, 26 years old, undrafted out of Sacramento State. The NFL is deprioritizing height with wide receivers and more getting into space and what they can do after the catch. And so in those regards, I am weary about being 5'7", but I am not throwing him away, is probably the main reason why he wasn't ever considered in the NFL either. The biggest things I look for my sub 5'11 Kings out there is, are you able to use the length that you do have to its fullest advantage, and can you take a hit? Isaiah Henny made the USFL highlight reel last year for spitting chiclets right after taking some chin music. Got right back up and continued playing. I don't have a whole lot of long-term concerns for somebody who can do something like that. I'd also note that at 5'7", 171 pounds, he has that build to him where he's not tiny, he's just short. I also think that he uses his length well at times, as you'll also see in my sweet B-roll feed that I made for you. This is a shifty and well-footed but short slot receiver slash returner slash gadget player. He went 46 of 66 for 474 yards and 3 touchdowns receiving. He also had 50 rush yards, 5 kickoff returns for 95 yards, 17 punt returns for 297 yards, and a touchdown. That led the USFL. That being said, as a receiver, I think his route tree is a little bit limited. He does little at the release point, but I will say that he's smooth as a runner. He just needs some development at route running. He has the skill set, in my opinion. I think that he's already immediately productive in gadget roles like sweeps and plays out of the backfield. I think he has, while he can catch with his body at times, the hands are good. And I do think that he uses his length well when he has to. He could jump and high point a little bit better. It's certainly something I think he could work on. Where he shines is, again, this after the catch open field sort of scenario for him. He has excellent body control. He works the sideline incredibly well. He has really good footwork along the sideline. I also think that he's just quite plain special after the catch. I think he breaks tackles well. He's shifty. He's resilient. He may not be the fastest in small spaces, but he's fast. I think he has excellent vision. I think he does a good job to set up his blockers and make lanes for himself. I think all of that stuff translates really well to punt returns. So I would argue that he's worth picking up as a return specialist alone, but I think he can contribute immediately as a gadget player or a decoy. He has the upside to continue developing into a depth slot player with his ball skills, with his quickness, with his footwork along the sideline, and the ability after the catch. Over the next 3 years or so, I would say his window is open. I have seen teams invest a lot more for pretty much the same thing. Isaiah Henny, I hope we see you in the NFL. As opposed to the 4.45 speed of Isaiah Henny, we are moving to the bullshit pro day speed of 4.2940 time of former New York Giant Derek Dillon. Derek Dillon never actually broke the New York Giants roster. He was kind of on the practice squad from 2020 and 2021, so not a real NFL career. 5'11", 179 pounds, 27 years old, undrafted out of LSU. Dillon was the USFL Special Teams Player of the Year, who scored on the coolest play that you could possibly score in football, a kick six, a 109-yard return kick six for a touchdown, in which he tiptoed what can only be described as the backest back of an end zone. As a receiver, he was 28 of 52 for 340 yards, 1 touchdown receiving, 23 kickoffs returned for 753 yards and a touchdown. As a kick returner, he's a much more of like a long strider. He has the speed to separate. He doesn't do like a whole lot of dancing around, but he does run with good angles. He understands how to set things up, and he'll blast through a small crease with force. He has a good understanding of how to tempo the speed that he has. He is not just a burner. I think that he's pretty good at setting up his blockers, and I think he has some pretty damn good body control as evidenced by that kick six. As a receiver, I would say that he's more of like just a big speed threat, and he's kind of a threat to score with the ball in his hands in space. I don't think that he's the kind of guy who's a threat to score at any given moment, who will dance out of 11 tacklers and make his way to the end zone. But he is the kind of guy that if he breaks a tackle and there's nobody within 5 yards of him, with his speed to separate, he might just be gone. And that's the kind of thing that you really can't teach, and it's hard to find other places. So I do think that makes him eye candy at the very least. He has some pretty good hands. I think he comes back to the ball well. As far as route running goes, he has some experience there where maybe some other guys don't in bigger programs. Like I said, 2 years with the Giants in a practice squad scenario. He's running a lot more wide receiver routes. Playing at LSU, I would probably say he's exposed to more routes than, say, Sacramento State. That being said, you don't really see a whole lot of what you would consider crisp or threatening route running. Just fine. I would say against zones, he's pretty good at stopping and understanding the soft spots in zones and getting to that. I just don't think that, soft spots in zone is a whole lot of what his game at the NFL could possibly be. I do think that he has the ability to get open at the top of the route, as much as I'm shitting all over his route running. I do think he understands how to do things at the stem. But he's also not really a varied route runner. He does have some gadget ability on sweeps, but I think when it comes to gadget plays, if you're just speed the way that he is, I think there's not a whole lot of value to running laterally. There's a lot more value to running north and south. So I don't really buy him as a gadget player. The USFL rules embrace the kickoff return, but the NFL certainly does not. So his limited ability as a wide receiver, I think it makes him a risky roster spot. Unless he's stored on the practice squad and elevated in specific situations or something like that. I think his outstanding special teams year might make him a risk that a team might want to take. A team that kind of maybe only just needs a big special teams presence to put them over the edge, or at least thinks that they do. Or a team that thinks that they have enough offensive firepower where adding just simple speed is all that's really needed. I could certainly see Derek Dillon being considered by a few teams in the league, but he's a little bit further down on the list for good reason. Derek Dillon, I hope we see you in the NFL. Next on the list of players that could make it to the NFL, tight end Jace Sternberger, 6'4", 251 pounds, 27 years old, was a third-round pick in 2019 out of Texas A&M by the Green Bay Packers, picked 75th overall. Why does Jace Sternberger count, even though former first-round picks don't? Well, for starters, he's a third-round pick, which is already the beginning of the gamble pick. And also because he was suspended his rookie season for substance abuse policy and waived right after, so I would not consider that really giving it a shot. As far as being a tight end, already makes the list for being how versatile he is. He lines up everywhere, Y, slot, outside, backfield, but he doesn't really offer anything special as a blocker, but he is a receiver out of all of those spots. He also has the size to block, so I think there is some teachability there. There's some level of cleaning up a lot of things. I don't think Jace Sternberger is a bad blocker. I just don't think that he offers anything special. With his size, I think that there is some minor tweaks you can make that can make him more and more useful in the blocking game. As far as being a receiving tight end with mismatch ability, he does not disappoint in the open field. He went 33 of 50 for 527 yards, 7 touchdowns receiving. That led the USFL. I think he has good speed to be a mismatch. He's not super fleet-footed for a tight end, but I do think that he's a lot for a lot of linebackers and DBs. I think he runs okay routes, but he runs a lot of variety of routes, or at least he did in Birmingham. I think he's really good at the catch point. I think he uses his size well. I think he has good hands. He has good body control. And I think he's great after the catch. He knows how to get north and south. He has the speed to separate. So if a linebacker is covering him, there's a good chance that that's just not good enough. If he's not there to break up the pass or make an immediate tackle, there's a good chance it's somebody else that's going to have to do that work. I honestly think that right now he's already better than a lot of teams' third tight ends. I think he should be able to improve his blocking technique. I'm not sure how much better he can get as a route runner at this point, but I don't think that he's horrible at that either. If that can still be developed, I think he has a longer window in the NFL than most of the other guys here. I guess the biggest concern is why a team was so willing to waive a third-round pick from a substance abuse policy breach. Tells me that maybe there's something else more there. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't do any research on that because I kind of don't care. I just like watching football. Jace Sternberger, I hope we see you back in the NFL. Last on the list and replacing Josh Peterson on this list is linebacker Frank Ginda, finally a defensive player. 6 feet, 225 pounds, he's 26 years old and went undrafted out of San Jose State. His 104 tackles led the USFL this year. He also had 3 tackles for a loss, 1 sack, and 3 interceptions. This year, he was the USFL Defensive Player of the Year and tackles leader. Last year, he was the number 2 tackler for USFL. I do think that being undersized at 6 feet has played against him, and not having excellent speed to make up for it has also worked against him. But he does have good speed, and I do think that he has surprising coverage ability. On passing downs, I think that being undersized kind of works against him a little bit, but he has a knack for being just in the right place at the right time. I also think that he moves pretty fluidly in his back pedal to get fairly deep for a linebacker. That being said, with his speed not being the greatest, it is pretty good closing speed on blitzes and going downhill. He has no edge bend to him, so there is no amount of coming off the edge and coming around a left tackle or anything like that. But he can shoot a gap and get right into the quarterback. I think he also has some pretty good speed for man coverage. I think as long as the route is something simple and lateral, he can run with a lot of running backs. He's not going to be running with Christian McCaffrey or anything like that, but in a normal game against a normal running back running a route, I think he can follow along. He can certainly keep up in those scenarios. I also think that he just has a fairly good natural feel for zone coverage. He certainly showed himself well in tip drills. He looks a little stiff, but just seems to be in the right place at the right time. On rundowns, I think this is where he could get better. I think he's pretty good at setting edges, but I do think he's undisciplined in choosing his gaps, which is a huge problem. It's also why he was the runner-up to this list and just sort of sneaked in at the end. That being said, I think he's pretty decent navigating his way through junk and finding his way around blockers. My bigger thing is that at 6 feet, he's going to have to blast through and work his hands better to get himself off blockers, because at the next level, he's not going to just be able to navigate through junk all the time. He's going to have to take on blockers and be better at it. I also think that the lack of length can inhibit his tackling ability. I think he's going to have to work on some grip and forearm strength. There were some broken tackles that, had he been just a little bit longer, had he been 6'3", would not have been broken tackles. He would have had more shirt in his hand at that time. Also underrated, I think he's very productive, and I think he's very vocal. I think there's something to be said to be the number 2 tackler in the league and then the number 1 tackler in the year after that. I do think that he's the least likely on this list to make the NFL jump seriously, but I do think that his role is the second inside linebacker in a base 3-4 defense. Given how few snap those players really get, it makes sense to go cheap at the position, especially if you think that you can develop some of the things that he's not that good at, such as his discipline and understanding what he's seeing in front of him. So if a team sees enough from the productive tackler, he could earn himself a shot. Given that he's productive in coverage as well, he doesn't embarrass himself in man coverage, I think he has a shot. He does need to get stronger and a little bit smarter, though, to succeed. But I could see a team thinking that they can develop him a little bit more. Frank Ginda, I hope we see you in the NFL. Everybody else, I hope I see you next time, which will hopefully be some college football preview stuff for guys I'm excited for the 2024 draft. So be sure to subscribe to this show so that you know when the next episode's coming, because I think Twitter is dying. That's all for this one. Let's go, New Jersey Generals.